Hey folks, Mr. Olson here. Let's do some econ. This is topic 6.1, an introduction to market failure and analyzing marginal social cost and marginal social benefit. So in a lot of ways, the first 5 units of this course are about markets, how markets actually work really well, how markets are an efficient way of distributing resources, and how they can give us, in many cases, socially optimum outcomes where there's no dead weight loss, right? So something that should be familiar to you now is how the invisible hand works. And if we look at like something like the market for computers, and people are willing and able to pay really high prices for computers like they were when they were new in the 90s, then businesses have the incentive to start making more computers. Why? Because they want to earn profit. And as more businesses enter that industry to earn more and more profit, that's going to lead to more competition. And when businesses compete with each other, they're going to have lower prices, better quality. We're going to have more variety of products as consumers. And if you want to stay profitable in that industry, firms are going to have to be more and more efficient and try to meet the demands of consumers more and more, right? So this is an idealized situation, but that you guys now understand how and kind of when that works in a lot of contexts. And in this instance, we don't need the government to get involved because society's needs are going to be automatically met, and those resources are going to chase those profits and meet the consumers' wants. Okay. However, this, of course, doesn't always work for all items, and I'm sure you can think of a lot of examples in your own experience or in your own understanding of the world where free markets don't meet society's needs, right? And that introduces the idea of a market failure. So a market failure is a situation in which the free market fails to satisfy society's wants. It's when the invisible hand doesn't work. And because private markets aren't going to work when there's a market failure, the government must step in to satisfy society's wants. And market failures are a situation where even the most conservative or libertarian economists are going to say the government needs to get involved here because the theory of the free market is just not going to work in these instances. In our context, we're going to look at 4 specific market failures. So economists have a pretty narrow definition of what a market failure is, and we're going to go through those in this unit. The first one is something called public goods. Number 2 is externalities. Number 3 are monopolies, which you all already know. And then number 4 is unfair distribution of income, aka inequality, which is a hugely important issue and growing challenge in our society today. So in all of these situations, we're going to look at why free markets fail to produce them efficiently and what the government can do to help society better allocate those resources. So kind of to introduce this idea about, well, how would governments and societies think about production on their own? Obviously, in a case like pizzas, private businesses are going to do a great job producing those. But what about products or services like aircraft carriers or parks? How should we go about determining what the optimum quantity of those items might be? Okay, well, we can still use our thinking as economists. We can still use supply and demand. And governments should think about marginal benefits and marginal costs, just like any good consumer or any good business. When they think about it, they can think about it a little bit differently with something called marginal social benefit and marginal social cost, which is just the good and usefulness to society. The marginal social benefit is the good and usefulness to society. And then the marginal social cost is the cost of providing an additional quantity of that good or service, right? And so for society as a whole, the demand is the marginal social benefit and the supply is the marginal social cost. When societies and governments are trying to determine the optimum output of anything, they want to try to produce where the marginal social benefit equals the marginal cost. So this is the same idea about supply and demand equilibrium that we've been looking at as microeconomists all the way along, but it's thinking a little bit more broadly about things that governments may need to make the decision in terms of how many to produce, right? So what's the optimum number of aircraft carriers for the US government to produce? Okay, let's do a simplified example. Here's a fake little society, and imagine that this little society is going to build a park. okay? And what you see in these two columns here are the willingness to pay by individuals in that society. So you can imagine we've surveyed them and they've quantified for you how much additional satisfaction in terms of dollars they get out of the number of parks that the society might have in their neighborhood. So just assume that there are only 2 people in the society. Assume that each park costs $5. Given that, then go ahead and pause the video and I want you to do an analysis. What is the optimum number of parks that should be created by the society? All right, so first thing we want to do is create 2 columns. We want to create the marginal social benefit column and the marginal social cost column, and then compare them. The society's benefit is the sum of all the individuals' benefit in that society. So if we sum up the willingness to pay by Adam and Jill, we get a marginal social benefit. The question already stated the marginal social cost is 5. So then we start saying, hey, how many parks should we build? How many taxpayer dollars should we use to build parks in this neighborhood? First park benefits $9. It only costs us 5. Should we produce it? Yes. Second one, 7 versus 5. Yes. Third one, 5 versus 5. Yes. The marginal social benefit equals the marginal social cost. By the time we get to the fourth park, because of the law of diminishing marginal utility, now consumers are only benefiting $3. It costs us $5 to produce, so we should stop at 3. So this is how you could use our thinking as economists and supply and demand to determine how many parks you should build in this particular neighborhood. You could express it using a demand curve as well, right? So we could graph the supply and demand for public parks in a society. We put that data here to develop a demand curve, which is equal to the marginal social benefit to society. In our case, we said that the costs were constant, okay? And you could still use the graph to analyze how many parks should we produce? Well, you look for that quantity where the marginal social benefit equals the marginal social cost. You could also use this graph to show that if we only had 1 park in our society, this would not be an efficient use of our resources. You can explain that because, as you can see from the graph, the marginal social benefit is greater than the marginal social cost. And that's telling us that society wants more. On the other hand, if there were 4 parks in our society, we could argue that that was an inefficient use of society's resources because the marginal social benefit was less than the marginal social cost. So society as a whole wants fewer parks, okay? So we can broaden our discussion a little bit beyond parks. You can pause and think about some of these kind of brain teasers on your own if you'd like. I want you to think about, can the government prevent wildfires in California forever? So could the government stop every single wildfire from ever happening again in California? Could the government ensure that no one ever speeds on the freeway at all? Could the government create a research station on Mars? Could the government stop all pollution from all fossil fuels? Okay. And so you can probably think about those situations and think about maybe strategies or policies that you could implement in order to get those things done. Okay. But what you also might realize is that even though the government could do them, in many of these instances, the costs might outweigh the benefits, right? So let's just use number 2 as an example. If we wanted to make sure that no one ever sped on the freeway, think about how many police you would need on the freeway. Think about maybe the restrictions you'd have to impose on firms so that cars could never go over 65 miles an hour if they wanted to, et cetera, right? So you could do it, but that may be an example of too much intervention because the cost would outweigh the benefits, right? So this way of thinking about problem solving and policy will be helpful for us as we advocate for government intervention to solve market failures in this unit. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.